Martin Papa Bear, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Martin. Or Mike. I'm Mike
Awesome.
Martin. I'm sorry. Yeah, you got your last name is my first name.
Yeah, it's confusing. It's been a long day. It's all right.
Yes, yes.
So we got connected via Brian Livingston, a mutual guest that we've had on both of our podcasts. And I had the opportunity to sit down on your show and kind of tell you about my world and what I got going on. Then you took this epic hike and this adventure, and now here we are sitting at the campfire project mindfully outdoors.
Yeah, Mike, it's great. It's great to be able to talk to you again. And I just want to thank you for you came on my show and we had a great talk, great conversation. It was great, great episode. And now I have the honor of being on your podcast. Yeah, as far as I go, yeah, I am a person who I guess you could say this July I celebrated my 50th year of being a backpacker. Took my first backpacking trip in July of 1972. It was up to Sunfish Pond, which is on the Appalachian Trail in New Jersey in the Worthington State Forest section. And I was hooked. It started with just a simple question to my father about these white blazes we saw on the tree. And he went on to explain to me that these blazes lead from Georgia all the way up to Maine. And it's this long trail and people hike it from one end to the other. And I grew up around the corner from our public library, went home and started reading about it. And yeah, I was hooked. And to make matters worse, went into school that year. And when teacher went around the class and asked what we did in the summer, and I said, well, I hiked up into this area and was on the Appalachian Trail. And she said, oh, I've hiked that whole trail with my husband. And I was a rock star, so I might not have been the best student, but at least she liked me because we had something in common.
I love that. That's the thing about the outdoors that I really have come to respect and celebrate is the fact that once you get into it, you get hooked.
Mhm.
For me, it was fishing with my grandfather, fishing and camping. And even though he ended up getting sick and I was a kid at the time, so I didn't have the resources to get out and go do these things. When later on in life, when he ended up passing away, it drew me back to it. It was like that connection, like we talked about when we recorded that conversation for your podcast. It's there's something special and unique about tapping into nature, no matter how you do it.
I've been kicking off my uh, Tramley series. This past year, I had a 2022 AT Tramley, and I'm now setting up to not just do an AT, but a PCT Tramley. And I've been speaking with a lot of backpackers, and you're right. Everybody just, once you've been out there, I guess you sort of get bitten by the outdoor bug and it just draws you out there. Mentally, you just feel like you're in a different place. You're in, and it's a great place to be.
It is. It's safe. It's comfortable. It's very natural. It's probably the most natural environment that you can step into.
Right. And everybody asks, and it's funny because when I interview other hikers or talk to other hikers, when you speak to people who aren't familiar with the outdoors, you always get the question, aren't you afraid of bears? And,
Yes.
I did a whole episode dedicated to the odds of being attacked by a bear, bitten by a snake, attacked by an alligator. You know, the odds are in your own community, you're far more likely to be in a car accident or trip and hurt yourself in your house than you are to be attacked by a bear. So when you talk about the safeness, yes, don't go out there recklessly. Go out there prepared to know that there is always that possibility, but it's not likely. And if you're prepared, you know what to do if there's an encounter.
Right. You go out there with the mindset of I'm walking into the unknown.
Right.
I'm mindful and I'm aware of that. And I think as I've traveled down this mindful aspect of the outdoors, I've learned just that it's what it truly that's what nature truly encourages is the mindful in the moment, being present and learning to discover that you have this resilience inside to get through whatever it is that she throws at you.
Yeah, Mike, I agree with you 100%. It does that, and it allows us to put ourselves in a vulnerable position to do things that we're not used to doing. Believe it or not, I had never camped in a camp area, a campsite by myself with nobody around until 2019 while I was section hiking the AT. I was up in Massachusetts and it was late in the season. There weren't many through hikers, and the ones that were out there were at the end of the southbound bubble. But bottom line is, rolled into camp one night and I said, well, maybe somebody will stumble in. And middle of the night, I got up and looked around, nobody else in camp. But yeah, that's something I never saw myself doing. You know, my whole life was either my kids, family, friends, when I was a scout leader. And I said, yeah, okay, so there's a little bit of a fear or apprehension I overcame. And I did that because, yeah, the outdoors allowed me to do that. It allowed me to put myself in that position where I could just say, all right, I can be a little vulnerable here and I feel comfortable here.
You know, it's that vulnerability that unlocks the imagination.
Mhm.
And when you unlock that little segment, you get this new freedom to explore who you truly are.
Mhm.
I I heard a quote the other day actually that I think really resonates with that. And it's kind of comparing the difference between religion and spirituality, because through religion you're following the story of somebody else that's already lived. Now in spirituality, you are encouraged to live the story.
Mhm. It's interesting you say that because if I'm asked if I'm a religious person, my usual response is not really, but I do consider myself a spiritual person. And those of us who venture into the outdoors, yeah, we're seekers, right? We're not following, we're seeking something.
it it's almost like a shift in mindset, really, when you look at it from that perspective, because with that aspect of it, religiously you're looking for somebody to give you something, right?
Yep.
You're praying for, hey, I want this to happen, I want that to happen. However, the spiritual aspect of being outside and exploring, you're living the situation. You're going out and actually doing. It's not somebody handing you something.
Yes, exactly. Um, and I don't like using the term get it, but I think people who haven't gone out and experienced it, it's sometimes difficult to put into words. And
No, you're
especially,
right.
and I've told people because when I first started doing my long distance or my 2 to 3 week hikes in the summer, it was common for people to say to me, "Aren't you scared out there? You going out there by yourself?" Well, first, most of the time, you're not really completely out there by yourself. If I were to get hurt, trip, fall, or whatever, I'm always in areas where I know there's going to be day hikers eventually that'll pass me or other backpackers. But the other side of it is being out there by myself. And I have hiked sometimes an entire day. I've hiked 7, 8 hours without crossing paths with another human. I just feel like those are the most fulfilling days when I'm out there. I feel like, these are the days where I'm maybe I'm discovering myself. I don't know if I want to get too deep here, if I sound like I'm getting too deep or hippie-ish here, but where I'm
That's
maybe
kind
able
of
to
what we're
get in
all
touch with
about here.
myself. Yeah, yeah, you're right. So yeah, you and the people listening to this, they'll get it, right? And they'll know that, yeah, that's what the outdoors does to you, though. Yeah, you have opportunities to contemplate, to look at yourself, to look at life, and as I say in my book, when we allow it, it is a transformable experience when we go into the outdoors.
As a hunter, there was actually a few years ago a day that I went out, and it's probably not the what's the word to say? It's not your stereotypical trip. A lot of people, when I tell this story, are going to be like, "Wow, seriously?" But I went out And for whatever reason that morning, I threw a copy of Meditations in my pack. Got out to the blind. I didn't hunt at all that day. I sat out there and I read from cover to cover, thinking and contemplating, the whole subject matter of the book, the way that things are presented. And I'll tell you what, man, that was probably one of the most life changing hunts that I've ever gone on. Of course, it was a long couple of day hunt, so I still had time. And, it just put everything in this different perspective for me.
Yeah. When I'd say, especially on multi-day trips, like your multi-day hunting trip, when we go out for, even if it's just weekend overnight trips, uh, you do have those moments. You do have that time, whether it's while you're laying in your tent trying to fall asleep, or in the morning when you're getting up, where I just think that you're probably at your peak as far as mental clarity is concerned. And I think that with a higher level of mental clarity, something like reading a book, especially if it's something that's kind of heavy in nature with its meaning, your mind's able to process it better and more effectively.
Most definitely. One thing I do love about the concept of reading, because that's the normal practice of mine, is I'll take hikes and just sit to read. And a lot of the times it's the same books over and over again because they impact you differently. When you're in one space, you perceive what you read one way, it makes sense. You grow and you move forward, and then you touch on it again, and you're like, oh, now I have this whole new understanding.
I'm glad to hear somebody else will read the same book over again. I've read Walden Pond, I think 4 or 5 times in my life, and at different points in my life. And it seems to always take on a different meaning. I read it while I've been out at scout camp. I've read it out on backpacking trips. I've taken it on vacation with me. I mean, of the different times that I've read it in my life. And yes, literature, or I'd say, there's good and bad literature. Let's be honest here. There's crap out there too. But if you're reading good literature that's going to make you think, yeah, when you read it over again, it has a tendency to take on a different meaning, or maybe even affect you in a different way, or maybe your mind's just in a place where maybe you're getting a better understanding of what the author's trying to say.
I feel like that honestly applies to going out in the outdoors too, though. When we go on these adventures, no matter what they are, they hit you in a different way. You learn a different lesson. Maybe you encounter the same scenario, but in the heat of the moment, the first time you overlooked what the lesson was going to be. And I think nature in itself really lays out this pattern that, of stairs that you're supposed to learn. On each stair there's a different lesson, and there's a tendency to kind of repeat those stairs until you actually digest and thoroughly learn that lesson. So even when you go out to, like, I have a couple of regular hunting spots that I truly enjoy. When I get out there, I'm in the same area. Maybe a lot of the same things happen, but there's that one little thing that is different. You never step in the same river twice, whether it's with a book or it's actually getting out and living the experience.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm somebody that embraces change. I know some people are afraid of it, but not all change is good. I mean, we could see signs of that in our lives, in the so-called civilized world that we live in. But the change that takes place in nature, in the outdoors, and that's, I think, what makes it so incredible. We can hike the same trail so many times, but find something different about it every time we're out there.
Absolutely. And, that change is, I think, when you go out there. In fact, I just recently did a piece about this. I went for a hike on I believe it was the first day, pretty close to the first day of fall. It was the first day that the weather actually started changing. And I sat around and I looked at, the landscape around me, the way that the trees were starting to turn colors, and how this transition was taking place, where you go through spring and summer, and things are born, things play and learn, and then when fall finally comes, that learning starts to turn into action. They start preparing for the winter that's coming, for the long hard months. And when it gets to that point, then they hit this like proving ground to prove that they're worthy of being alive, which everything on earth is just that. It's worthy to be alive. And as I was putting it together, I was thinking about it. So many of us get caught up in the rat race that we forget about that worth, that real, honest, deep rooted worth. We take it from everything around us, for sure. But when winter comes and all those things that gave us value are gone, we're standing there like a barren tree. There's so much growth that's happening within us because this change is happening, but we can't see it. We can't feel it in the moment. And therefore we feel like we're worthless or we don't have a purpose.
You're right. I mean, if we break down the seasons and look at it in our as we're living our lives, yeah, I mean, what happens when the winter comes? Do we look around at all this crap we buy, all our material goods, sit here and wait for the weather to get better? Or do we say, there's still things going on. There's things in me that are changing. My mind is still working. Um, and you're right. I think you look at it from that perspective. The forest doesn't just stop for the winter. There's another phase going on, taking us to the spring to keep the cycle moving. But I really like, Mike, the way you're looking at this is that if our lives, we look at our lives as in that same cycle. Don't stop and say, well, there's nothing, the trees are barren now. I'm barren. I have nothing to do. Now there's always something, we always have something to look forward to. There's always something new that's just around the corner for us.
And then I think to build on that and kind of touch on it a little bit more is I got it to a point where I was kind of comparing the fact that, the leaves fall off the trees after they turn colors, right? But it almost looks as if that tree is reluctant to relinquish the leaves, almost fighting to hold on to them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even though deep down it knows that as nature starts to slow the process because it's going to cool off, freeze up, and there won't be so many nutrients for it to suck up, it just doesn't want to let go.
All right.
But through the natural process, as it does let go, the trunk and the branches, they grow. You don't really see it. I'm sure the tree feels it and knows that it's happening, but rewind it back to the early to mid part of fall, and they didn't want to let go. And we do that exact same thing with change. Whether we're changing a habit, the people around us disappear, or whatever the case may be, we grip onto that so hard and we fight that change so much because, yeah, we're afraid. We're afraid to be that barren tree that's growing, the branches and the trunk. But we're forgetting the fact that in the spring, that tree is going to bloom and it's going to push out a full new canopy. That's where I feel like the disconnect happens a lot with a lot of people.
Right. We have that leave in our life that we're not letting go of, and it stunts our growth as people. emotionally, um, can be stunting our growth, preventing us from moving forward. And I think all of us at one time or another, if we're not now, at some point in our lives, have dealt with that, where we have that one leaf that we're afraid to drop off the tree that could be stunting us from growing into what we can be when we come out the other side of it.
You're right. That's exactly what it is. And I feel like when you go into the outdoors, you go on a hike, go on whatever adventure it is that you're out there to do. These are the kind of things that you get to just sit down and pick up on. You know, when I'm out hiking, regardless of where I'm at, I like to go find a spot that's off the beaten path. And I like to just sit there and just watch my surroundings, as still as I can be, and just see what happens. Because, I'll be honest with you, I believe that the animals and everything else that's out there are here to teach us things. But we get so caught up in the rat race of life that, a lot of that gets thrown out the window.
Well, as humans, we believe we're the superior beings, the superior life form on Earth, and nobody could, nobody could teach us something, right? But with me, from a very young age, maybe when I started learning about the whole soil composition and how leaves decompose, and I can't remember what grade I was in when I started learning that. I just found myself every time, and to this day, I still do it, stopping every once in a while and taking all that in. That, okay, the leaves, say it's a summer hike, the leaves are going to fall off that tree. They're going to decompose. They're going to create some soil. There's going to be some fungi. There's going to be habitat for bugs, and that the soil is going to feed those trees, and the fungi is going to feed trees and plants in there, and the bugs are going to be able to feed the different animals. And I've just, like I said, from a young age, so amazed when I sit there and contemplate the whole cycle, and how, as you point out, we should be learning from that. So those same principles could be applied to our own lives. Now, we're not literally trees and don't literally have leaves falling off us and decomposing to provide us with nutrients, but mentally, we're all probably carrying around something that we probably should be dropping and allow it to decompose so we can regenerate, rethink, and move forward in our lives.
But that's where I think you brought up a very important word, and that word being cycle. Because we learn things growing up, and they can be healthy cycles, they could be unhealthy cycles. And it's important for us as stewards of ourselves, and as we walk and navigate through the world, to look at each one of those cycles, each one of those habits that we've been taught and developed, and establish whether or not it falls in the healthy category or it falls in the unhealthy category. If it falls in the healthy category, then of course we cherish it. Well, we actually build on it, put nourishment into it, and we let it grow. Now, if it's one of those unhealthy cycles that we worked and that we learned and we're doing, not getting the results that we want out of life, it's time to break that and drop that leaf and let something new, let that decay, let something new grow in its place. And what's cool about doing that is it allows you the space to decide exactly what it is that's going to be there. Because after all, it's your job to pick and choose what your adventure and what your story in life is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I think we have a tendency sometimes to be, not all of us, but we could be a little judgy, but we all have things that we need to work on. All of us do. Some of the stuff we need to work on is right out where everybody can see it, whether it's a mental health issue or what have you. fighting addiction, or just bad habits. They're there. And I think to bring this back, take it back to where we started, cycle it back. The time we spend in the outdoors, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody. For me, that's my opportunity that's maybe my fall season. Now that, when you put it in the perspective you did, and in the course of this conversation, those times that I'm out there for a week or two, that's my fall. That's my autumn. That's when I'm shaking the leaves off my tree and reevaluating.
And I almost feel, as I listen to you, that that's the time that you talk to yourself, to
Mhm.
others, you explore. And then when you come back from the fall season, you get into the winter, which would be like that proving ground. And that's where you start, where the rubber meets the road, where you start to actually put those discussions and those theories into practice. And you get back to the cycle concept of what you're going to nourish and what you're going to relinquish. And the ones that you're going to nourish are going to prove themselves out. You hone them, you build them, and then whatever you relinquished, that space now becomes an opportunity to add new skills on top of the ones that are working for you.
I interviewed a aspiring Pacific Crest Trail hiker last night, and I always ask these aspiring long distance hikers, what are your fears or apprehensions at this point in the planning of your hike? And it could be anywhere from wildlife encounters. I've had people say human encounters, getting hurt. Well, this gentleman said, my fear is, how am I going to reacclimate back into society after I return from the trail for 5 months of being out there in nature? And I thought that was a very interesting answer, because so I'm going to be out there communing with nature, understanding it, being part of it. But how am I going to be able to transform back into it? And that's, that's maybe in the context of this conversation, that's his winter season is, now I'm walking back into this and having to start this cycle of growing and getting ready to provide new canopy.
Well, you know what, though? I feel like it's an acknowledgement of the fact that whatever it is you're going through and whatever, steps are along the path, they change you. You know, you
Mhm.
can't you can't walk up to the trailhead and walk the trail, get to the end, go back to the truck, and be the same person that you were when you walked out and started. You evolve no matter what it is that you face. Because you know what, I could see myself giving that kind of a response to something like that based
Mhm.
on the fact that I've gone through different things in life. I don't know if I could ever meet those events the same ever again. And yeah, at times that thought scares me because you know what, I don't know what it would ever look like.
Mhm.
But it boils down to that concept of sometimes you don't need to know. You just need to live the moment. Be flexible and be willing to pivot and allow yourself to just go into whatever it is that you're up against, whatever it is you're walking into, knowing that that's going to change you as well.
All right. And those hours, those days, right? Those long durations of hiking by myself, that's those are the times where I probably had those type of growth moments. I felt like, yeah, there were maybe some fears I had, or some things I just needed to shake. A question I'm commonly asked is, you, know, you solo hike, how do you do that? I could never be out there by myself all day. I don't think I can handle being alone all day. I, th- I tell people, do it once and you'd be surprised. You'd really be surprised how much you learn about your surroundings, how much more aware you are of what's in front of you, what you see, what you hear. Um, you know, living in our lives, going to the supermarket or out to dinner or to work, I think you start to become a little deaf to all the noise going on. We start shutting it out. You know, we hear what's on the radio, not completely, but sort of hear what's on the radio. We have conversations, and sometimes we're not even fully engaged in those conversations. We see things, but it might only be what we absolutely need to see. Is that, the color of that traffic light, or are there pedestrians or bicyclists on the roads, or, do they have the brand of potato chips I'm looking for? But when you're out in nature, you just, those distractions all go away. All those extraneous noises and visuals are gone. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's almost a hypnotic experience too, where it's just listening. I'm somebody, and I'm not criticizing people who do this, but I will not listen to music or podcast, or I don't put anything in my ears when I'm hiking. I want to take in every sound. I don't want to be distracted by something non-related to my experience. I don't want to miss out on seeing something really cool because I was listening to some music or a podcast. Just if you're listening to my podcast, that's okay though. No, but and I've always been this way. I mean, technology has made it that, I think it's common for people to do that, to listen to music, audiobooks. But I feel like I'd be ripping myself off if I didn't allow myself that it's, because it's, and I don't want to sound too deep here, but it's a spiritual experience if you go out there and just allow yourself to take it all in. You've removed all the noise pollution and the visual pollution, as I'll put it. It's all removed. You're stripped down, figuratively naked here, just out in nature, with an opportunity to take all of it in. I wouldn't trade it. I just,
No, it's something that can't be traded for anything in this world. When all week long you're nose to the grindstone facing whatever device, or trying to reach whatever production goals there are within whatever it is you do for a living, all the stress and pressure, then to finally get out in the wild where all of that's completely irrelevant. It takes a minute to shake all the stresses and rigors of the world off your shoulders. But once you do, and you're standing there as vulnerable and naked and on the same level as everything around you, it's truly one of the deepest, I think, moments and feelings that you can ever experience.
Yeah. And for me, with backpacking, it's, the pressures are gone. I wake up in the morning, look at the map, and okay, so we have to hike over this summit and go to camp. That's it. I'll roll out of bed when I want to roll out of bed, start hiking. And I talk about the the noise pollution and the visual pollutants that are in our lives, but there's also the stresses that are pollutants in our world, and removing all that. And I'm sure you go through that when you hunt, right? Once you get out of your truck and start heading towards your hunting spot, your only pressure is putting one foot in front of the other to get to where you want to set up to hunt. That's it. And that's a pressure you're welcome.
I think when you take all the added elements to the story out of that, yeah, it boils down to just that. It's the pressure that you put on yourself. It's the story that you tell yourself, like I'm hiking out to whatever my hunting spot is, and I'm so concerned about, number one, the wind, my scent, and then I'm also concerned about what I'm stepping on the ground, what's around and things like that. And yeah, it all plays a factor, but you know what? We blow those things up in our mind
Yeah.
because we read all these different things, and we've learned all these different things that there's an element of it that I feel takes away from the adventure.
Mhm. Yeah, I like to tell people my favorite, most memorable trips are the ones where everything doesn't go according to plan. Because is it really an
Yes.
adventure if you sit at home and come up with a spreadsheet that says on day one we're going to do this, this, and this, and this, and on day two we're going to do A, B, C, and D. Now, my favorite trips, my even whether it's a day hike or a multi-day hike, backpacking trip, my favorite, most memorable ones are the ones where things don't go according to plan. Where maybe you end up having to hike back to the car in the dark, or maybe you have to hike a little further to get your water. It's and again with the pressures, those are, I call them pressures. I don't know if it's even really pressure. It's because they're things as we're out there we roll with and we deal with them and we get through it.
It's a lot funner that way. It's like I think back a few years ago to opening day, and essentially what I thought was going to be, just a simple truck in, sit down and do my thing, turned into about a 3.5 hour hike looking for a dry place to land, even a hunt. And that was quite the adventure. Sure, I could have got around that by putting boots on the ground beforehand and figured out what I was walking into, but that probably would have defeated it. But that was actually probably one of my favorite opening day adventures. And instead of a deer that morning, I walked out with a coyote, but it is what it is.
Mhm.
I think, though, what it gets down to is that pivot point, that being willing to pivot and flexibility, learning that you can actually trust your instincts, trust yourself to adapt and overcome whatever is thrown your way. And when things like that happen, they probably do become more memorable because you actually somehow connected with the experience, with the event. You know, you had to think on your feet, you learned a bit of a lesson, or you just embraced it and you made it that much more of an adventure because it got stretched out longer.
Yeah, when I talk to through hikers, yeah, they all enjoy their hike and their experience, but they'll go on for forever about, oh, the days that it rained forever, or it did this, or it was dropped down to 20 degrees one night. That's the stuff they're remembering. The stuff
Yes,
that challenged them, the stuff that challenged their abilities and skills.
it's all about that adversity. That's
Right.
one of the biggest lessons that I feel Mother Nature has to teach us is you can endure all these different things that happen. And you know what, when you get back in the truck and you drive back home, you can endure all those things as well. Whatever it
I
is that comes your way.
I attended a church service. This is probably 1998, 97. And they were giving a talk about the blessings of adversity. And in a nutshell, it was we need to look at adversity in terms of making us stronger, not punishing us, not a punishment. When we meet adverse situations in our lives, it's not a punishment, it's not a deterrent, but a blessing. It's a way for us to grow.
I think one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard around the subject is the fact that building a fire, when you do it by hand, you take you have to go out and you have to take all the different pieces of the puzzle, right? And then you have to actually spark the flame by getting your coal and your ember, and then you blow on it, and ultimately you nurture it into a fire. And I think that for me, adversity is the exact same thing. You have all these different forces that you're up against that you have no control over. And you got to go out, pull from your toolbox the necessary elements that are going to help you to get through it. And you begin to start to turn the bow, grind it down, you get your ember. And then that's progress. And as you start to come through it, you're blowing on that ember, you're adding wind, and you're sparking a fire. So you're nurturing yourself into the growth.
Yeah. Yep. It's a process. It's, yeah. There's no magic pill or magic potion. It's a process that you have to go through. When we meet adversity, whether it's just something simple while we're on a hike or in life in general, coming through it, getting to the other side of it is a process.
Which I think really sparks, kind of like an impulsive question that pops to mind. If we all have to face this adversity and it's supposed to do such a good thing for us and help us to grow and, things like that, why does so many fear it? Why are we so afraid to embrace the suck?
I think we all like comfort. We all like knowing I'm going to go to bed. The sun's going to come up. It's going to be 70 degrees outside. My car is going to start. I'm not going to get a cold. It's the whole comfort thing. And it comes down to, something we've already mentioned a couple of times here, stepping out of your comfort zone, I guess you could say, right? When we go out into the woods and we go into the outdoors, we're stepping out of our comfort zone, and it's real easy to stay in that comfort zone, right? That's easy to do. That's an easy way to go
So,
through life.
I think if my counselor actually heard this, she'd probably want to punch me in the face for what comes to my mind. It's the difference between backpack camping and glamping. You
Yeah.
take all the blow up furniture with you, with the concept, you know what, this is going to be comfortable, and I can pull out my device and there's my TV because I'm out in the wild, I'm living the experience, but I've got all the glamour and all the comfort.
Right. Right. Right.
It's easy. But if you want to really endure and build that self endurance, you're pulling your backpack out of you're pulling your tent out of your backpack that you just hiked in on your back. You're setting up that one tent. You may have a cot, you may not. You're pulling out the sleeping bag, and you're enjoying the stars.
Yep.
You're enjoying the space for your mind to just expand.
Yeah. Yeah. I could find a place where I could pull up and sleep in a nice cabin and have a spigot to get my water, flush toilets and a shower, et cetera, et cetera. But no, I like hiking 10, 15 miles into the woods and going where no vehicles are, and I'm filtering my water. I camped in places this summer while I was in Lake Tahoe that were just absolutely beautiful. And the beauty of it was because you just felt like you were truly getting a wilderness out in the wild type experience. We had nights we didn't even put my middle son was with us, and you talk about looking at the stars. We wouldn't even put the rain flies on the tent at night just because there was the skies were so clear, and there's no light pollution. You're not near any cities or anything. So you get such a when there was no cloud cover. And God, yeah, to be able to stare up at that, go to one of these campgrounds and try to do that. Go glamping and see what kind of view you're going to actually get. From between the street lights they have, or people's high powered Coleman lanterns blasting, and yeah, no, no way. I'll take hiking my gear, throwing my stuff on my back, and walking 14 miles into the woods any day over that.
Which really to me comes from, developing that sense of trust within yourself through the adversity. Because, a lot of people take that glamping or that easy path because there's not so much trust that's been built because they haven't faced it. And, to go and start to climb that mountain of adversity really feels scary, overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't have a battle plan at all. So if you kind of break it down a little bit, You go a little bit further, get one of the campsites that is a little bit further out, maybe do a rustic camping trip,
Mhm.
and really, really let yourself embrace it. You feel that sense of confidence when you're pulling back into the driveway at the end of it, and that'll give you a little bit of a spark to take the next step, hike 5 miles, set up shop, and enjoy that camping trip. It all comes in stages. You got to cut your teeth, and you got to give yourself the grace to do that.
Yeah. I'm not advocating for people to just say, okay, I'm going to go out and buy $2,000 worth of backpacking gear and go on a long distance hike. But you make a good point. Yeah, little chunks. Get out there, do that short hike first. Go a little further next time. Start to overcome those fears. Right. Because there's things, we talked about, the question I'm always asked about bears. Well, I always for years had a little bit of a fear of bears until I actually in a distance was hiking and saw one running and it was running away from me. And over the years, I've become less concerned about bears and to the point now where I don't even think about it when I'm out there. Snakes, venomous snakes. Well, when you see a venomous snake a couple of times, you don't become reckless, don't do anything stupid, but that fear of seeing one goes away because you start to, in your mind, you start to say, okay, it's here. It's here. I know what to do if I see one. I'm not going to step on it or try to pick it up. But if it's here, I know I'm going to get through this. I'm going to be able to hike around it or wait till it moves. I know that I'm going to be able to complete my goal. And the more you get out there, you face your fears, the more comfortable you'll be. But that's part of the growth is quite honestly taking on your fears. I personally think that's a big part of our growth is when we can. Well, we talked about how, why people aren't getting out, the comfort of, why people won't go out and face adversity. Well, it could be a little frightening, but when you do, I just think it's so much more rewarding. I think there's a big reward. Like you said, if you take that 2 mile backpacking trip, the next morning you go down to the car, you're going to feel good. You're going to feel good that you spent the night out in a tent up on a mountain and had to go filter your own water and you cooked with a small stove. You'll feel good about that.
Yeah, yeah, it's like changing the definition of fear. I feel is kind of like the most important aspect that really the outdoors can teach you. Changing the story
Mhm.
because when you let fear hold you back in any aspect of life, you miss out on so much. When
Mhm.
you look at it and you embrace it, you say, okay, I'm scared of that, I'm scared of this, but shift the mindset a little bit to take the emphasis off it and not listen to the story that's going on in your mind. You begin to take the power to embrace who you are and to really build the artwork that is the life that you're here to live.
Yeah. I've seen youth go through it when I was a volunteer at the Boy Scouts and the adults I would take out on trips. I'd see the change. I'd see the look in her eye when they made it back to the car and said, I actually had a good time and that was a good experience. That was something I never thought I'd ever do. I've had adults say that to me when I've taken them out on their first backpacking trip. We'd get back to the car or stop for lunch on the way home, and they'd say to me, wow, I never ever thought I would do something like that. Actually, spend the night in the woods sleeping in a tent. Wow. And I say, well, is it something you want to do again? Oh, absolutely.
That's one of my favorite responses when I take somebody out, whether it's, a first time, whatever we're doing, and they come back and like, man, I really enjoyed that. I want to do it again. Or, it's somebody that goes out on a regular basis and I kind of expose them to the mindful aspect of it. And they're
Mhm.
like, man, I never thought about that deep connection and how much impact that actually has on life and on them as they go forward.
Yeah,
And I
whether we're conscious of it or not, it's happening to us when we're out there.
and I really feel like that's something that needs to be celebrated. and not feared.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No,
So
it's Mhm.
no, I was gonna say, so Martin, as we start to run toward the end of our time, I want to celebrate the journey that you just took with you sharing some words of wisdom, advice, and growth from the hike and the adventure.
Well, this summer I had the opportunity to hike Tahoe Rim Trail with my middle son, Christopher. And yeah, he's been living out west for a number of years now. So it was really special to be out there with him. And um, I really felt like there was in addition to having an enjoyable experience, I think we both connected um, as a father and son. But I watched him, somebody who's been backpacking and enjoying the outdoors and taking it all in. It was very rewarding to watch him do this. Uh, I could see the look in his eye when we would come to certain things. He'd wake up in the morning and talk about things he was thinking about. I heard more clarity in his thoughts on our way home from our trip. So as far as advice would go, I would say, number one, if you have children, you have a niece or a nephew in your life, take them out there, start getting people exposed to the outdoors at a young age. I think when we're doing this, we're setting ourselves up. Quite honestly, I believe we could be setting ourselves up to be a better society if we're teaching our children the outdoors, allowing them to experience it. As children, they're going to be awed by, the animals, the insects, and the trees. But as they mature and get older, they're going to see the deeper meaning of what's happening there. And even if you don't think they're getting it, they are.
That's very well said. I don't think there's anything that needs to be added to that because it was beautiful. So, as we wrap this up, you have to let everybody know where they can find not only your podcast, but the latest happenings with you.
Well, the best way to find me and track me is to go to papabearhikes.com. At papabearhikes.com, there's links to all of my social media, the YouTube channel, Martin Outside. So if you go to YouTube, it's Martin Outside. And all of our podcast episodes are on there. Or you can just go to Papa Bear Hikes. We're on every podcast platform. Type it in. We're coming up on our 300th episode, and that's really cool. Closing in on year 2. But yes, the best way to find us is papabearhikes.com.
I love it, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to celebrate the journey with you. So, thank you very much. We got to do this again sometime soon, man.
Absolutely, Mike. It's been a pleasure. And yes, maybe after hunting season or once our hunting season gets underway, you'll have to come on my podcast and share some hunting stories or experiences with us.
Oh, most definitely, man. I'd love to keep an ongoing thing going.
Yeah. No, I love having return guests. And that's not an invitation I put out to everybody, just for the record, that there are some guests that I have on multiple times. And that's because when I'm speaking to them, I feel there's a relationship there. So yes, we will definitely
Yeah,
be talking again.
I feel honored. We'll definitely make it happen.
Yeah.